He laughed in the child's face, insisting no black woman could ever serve in special forces. The girl stood frozen with
Laughs
tears in her
mockingly.
eyes until the doors opened and her mother appeared in uniform. The afternoon sun streamed through the glass entrance
Laughs
of South Park
mockingly.
Mall in Charlotte, casting long shadows across the polished tile floors. Inside Dick's Sporting Goods, the usual Saturday crowd browsed through racks of athletic wear and displays of gleaming equipment. The gentle hum of air conditioning mixed with the soft rock music playing overhead, creating the kind of background noise that made conversations feel private even in public spaces. 12-year-old Amaya Richardson moved through the shoe section with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in her own skin. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore a simple purple t-shirt and jeans that her mother had carefully picked out that morning. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed for attention. Just a normal kid on a normal shopping trip with her best friend. "These are cute," said Kaylin Torres, holding up a pair of white and pink Nike sneakers. At 13, Kaylin was only a year older than Amaya, but she carried herself with the slight superiority that came with being in 8th grade, while Amaya was still navigating 7th. Despite their age difference, they'd been inseparable since Kaylin's family had moved to Charlotte 3 years ago. Amaya examined the shoes, turning them over in her hands. The price tag made her wince slightly. Her mother had been clear about the budget for this trip. "They're nice, but I think my mom would have a heart attack if she saw how much they cost." "Your mom seems pretty cool about stuff like that," Kaylin said, settling cross-legged on the floor to try on a pair of running shoes. "I mean, she bought you those expensive cleats for soccer." "That's different. That was for sports. She always says if it helps me play better, it's an investment." Amaya sat down beside her friend, pulling off her own sneakers to try on a pair of black and gold Nikes. "These feel nice." The girls fell into the comfortable rhythm of teenage shopping, trying on shoes, comparing prices, discussing which ones would look best with their school uniforms. Other customers moved around them, the typical Saturday mix of families, couples, and solo shoppers hunting for deals or specific items. "So when's your mom picking us up?" Kaylin asked, checking her phone. "My mom wants to know if I'll be home for dinner." Amaya glanced at the store's wall clock. She said around 4, but you know how it is. She's still at Fort Bragg, finishing up some meeting thing. Her schedule gets pretty crazy sometimes. "What kind of meeting?" Kaylin had known Amaya for 3 years, but the details of Mrs. Richardson's military career were often vague. She knew Amaya's mom was in the Army, wore uniforms sometimes, and traveled frequently, but the specifics had never really come up in their conversations about school drama and weekend plans. "I don't know exactly. Something about training protocols or mission debriefs. She doesn't usually tell me the boring details." Amaya shrugged, then added with casual pride, "She's in special forces, so sometimes the stuff she does is classified anyway." The words came out naturally, the way any kid might mention their parent's profession. Amaya wasn't showing off or trying to impress anyone. She was simply stating a fact about her mother's job, the same way another child might mention their parent was a teacher or a nurse. But those words, special forces, carried differently in the air than other job descriptions. They seemed to hover, drawing attention in a way that accountant or manager never would. Kaylin's eyes widened. "Wait, seriously? Like actual special forces? With weapons and dangerous missions and all that?" "Yeah." Amaya's tone remained matter-of-fact, but a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "She just got back from overseas last month. She was gone for 4 months this time. She can't tell me much about what she does, but sometimes she shares little things, like how they train in different terrains, or how they have to learn multiple languages." "That's so cool," Kaylin breathed. "I had no idea. Your mom always seems so normal when I see her." "She is normal. She just happens to have a really intense job." Amaya stood up, testing the fit of the sneakers she was trying on. "She says the hardest part isn't the physical stuff, or even the dangerous parts. It's being away from home so much." The conversation might have continued in that same easy tone, two friends sharing details about their families while shopping for shoes. But from a few feet away, standing near a display of Under Armour hoodies, someone had been listening. And that If you are enjoying this this conversation, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means a lot to us. We are just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you. And back to the video. Officer Colton Reeves had been browsing the men's athletic or section when the girl's conversation caught his attention. At 42, he'd spent the last 20 years in law enforcement, working his way up from patrol officer to his current position as a senior officer with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. He was proud of his service record, his knowledge of military and law enforcement protocols, and his ability to spot deception from a mile away. Dressed in casual weekend clothes, jeans, a Carolina Panthers t-shirt, and sneakers, he looked like any other off-duty professional running Saturday errands. The only hint of his profession was the badge clipped to his belt, a habit he'd developed over the years. Even on his days off, he liked people to know who he was. When he heard Amaya mention Special Forces, his first reaction was amusement. Kids said a lot of things to impress their friends. He'd heard it all over the years: fathers who were secret agents, mothers who were famous singers, grandparents who had been astronauts. It was part of childhood, that natural tendency to embellish and fantasize about the adults in their lives. But as he listened longer, noting the casual confidence in the girl's voice, the specific details she shared, something about it bothered him. Not because he thought she might be telling the truth, but because she seemed so convinced of her own story. In his experience, the most persistent liars were often the ones who had convinced themselves their fabrications were real. The laugh started as a low chuckle, almost involuntary. But once it began, it grew, drawing the attention of nearby shoppers and causing both girls to turn toward him. Special Forces, Reeves said, his voice carrying the tone of someone who'd just heard a particularly amusing joke. Come on, kid. Amaya's stomach dropped. She'd been caught off guard by the interruption, but more than that, she was confused by the man's tone. Why was he laughing? What had she said that was funny? Kaylin shifted closer to her friend, sensing trouble. They'd both been raised to be polite to adults, but something about this man's manner set them both on edge. Reeves stepped closer, his casual demeanor making the encounter feel almost friendly, if not for the mocking edge in his voice. Look, I've been in law enforcement for 20 years. I work with military personnel all the time. I know the kind of people who make it into Special Forces, and I can tell you right now. He paused, his eyes moving over Amaya in a way that made her feel suddenly very aware of her appearance, her age, her race. There's no way your mom is running around with the Green Berets. The words hit Amaya like cold water. She felt her face flush, not just from embarrassment, but from a growing anger she didn't know how to express. You don't know my mom, she said quietly, her voice barely carrying over the store's background music. Maybe not, Reeves replied, his tone taking on the patience adults used when explaining something obvious to a child. But I know the military, and I know that kids like to make their parents sound more exciting than they really are. It's normal, nothing to be ashamed of. Around them, other shoppers had begun to notice the exchange. A mother pushing a cart with a toddler slowed her pace, pretending to examine a display of sports socks while listening. Two teenage boys near the checkout counter nudged each other, phones already in their hands. A middle-aged man in a baseball cap looked up from the clearance rack, his brow furrowed with growing concern. But no one said anything. Not yet. Amaya's hands trembled as she bent to put her regular shoes back on. She wanted to defend her mother, wanted to explain about the medals in their living room, the photos from military ceremonies, the way other soldiers spoke to her mother with unmistakable respect. But under the weight of this stranger's certainty, her own words felt small and insufficient. It's not made up, she managed, her voice stronger now. My mom is Sergeant Major Nicole Richardson. She's been in the Army for 22 years. Reeves raised his eyebrows, his expression shifting to one of exaggerated surprise. Sergeant Major? Well, that's quite a promotion from your first story. He looked around at the growing audience, playing to them now. First it was Special Forces, now she's a Sergeant Major. Pretty soon she'll be running the whole Pentagon. The casual cruelty in his tone was devastating. Amaya felt tears beginning to sting her eyes, but she fought them back. Crying would only prove his point, would make her look like exactly what he claimed she was, a silly little girl making up stories. Kaylin found her voice. She's not lying. I've met her mom. She's really in the military. Reeves turned his attention to the older girl, his smile taking on a patronizing edge. I'm sure she wears a uniform. Lots of people wear uniforms. Doesn't make them Special Forces. That's like saying everyone who wears scrubs is a brain surgeon. The comparison was meant to be dismissive, but it revealed something about Reeves's thinking that the growing audience was beginning to notice. Several people exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from amusement to discomfort. Look, Reeves continued, addressing both girls now. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm trying to help you understand something important. The real world doesn't work like movies or video games. Special Forces is serious business. It's for people who've proven themselves in combat, who've earned their place through blood and sweat. It's not. He gestured vaguely at Amaya, the incomplete sentence carrying more weight than any words he might have finished it with. The unspoken implication hung in the air like smoke. Not for people like her. Not for someone who looked like her. Amaya's chest tightened. She could feel the eyes of strangers on her, could sense their discomfort, but also their curiosity. Were they wondering if the man was right? Were they looking at her and thinking the same thing he was thinking? The sporting goods store, which had felt spacious and comfortable just minutes earlier, now seemed to shrink around Amaya. Every rack of clothing, every display of equipment felt like a barrier trapping her in this increasingly uncomfortable situation. The bright fluorescent lighting that had seemed cheerful now felt harsh and exposing. Officer Reeves had positioned himself between the girls and the main aisle, not intentionally blocking their path, but creating a psychological barrier that made leaving feel impossible. His casual stance, one shoulder against a display rack, arms crossed loosely, suggested he had all the time in the world for this conversation. "You know what?" he said, his tone shifting to something that might have sounded helpful to someone who wasn't paying close attention. "I think I know what happened here. You probably heard your mom talking about military stuff. Maybe she mentioned knowing someone in Special Forces, and you got confused. Kids do that. They hear half a conversation and fill in the blanks." Amaya shook her head. "No, that's not." "Or maybe," Reeves continued, not allowing her to finish. "She told you she was in Special Forces to make her job sound more exciting. Some parents do that. They don't want their kids to worry about them being in dangerous situations, so they make up stories about being superheroes instead." The suggestion that her mother would lie to her felt like a slap. Amaya's voice rose slightly, drawing more attention from nearby shoppers. "My mom doesn't lie to me, and she doesn't need to make anything up. What she does is already—" "Already what?" Reeves interrupted. "Already dangerous enough. Already important enough. Look, sweetheart, I'm sure your mom works hard. I'm sure she's a good soldier. But Special Forces isn't something you just stumble into. It's not something they hand out to make people feel better about themselves." A woman browsing the women's athletic wear section had stopped pretending to shop and was now openly watching the exchange. She looked troubled by what she was hearing, but uncertain about whether to intervene. Beside her, an elderly man leaned heavily on a shopping cart, his expression growing increasingly disapproving of the officer's behavior. Kaylin stepped closer to Amaya, her protective instincts kicking in. "Why are you being so mean about this? What if she's telling the truth?" Reeves's laugh was sharper this time. "What if? Okay. What if we lived in a world where every kid's claim about their parents was true? What if every story was real? We'd have a lot more astronauts and movie stars and secret agents than we actually do." He looked around the growing circle of onlookers, seeking validation for his skepticism. "I'm not being mean. I'm being realistic. And sometimes reality isn't as exciting as we want it to be." Amaya felt something crack inside her chest. Not just hurt, but something deeper. A fundamental assault on her understanding of truth and trust. This man, this stranger with his badge and his certainty, was telling her that her own experience, her own knowledge of her mother's life, was worthless. "You don't know anything about my family," she said, her voice shaking but growing stronger. "You don't know what my mom has done or where she's been or what she sacrificed." The word sacrificed seemed to amuse Reeves even more. Sacrificed? Now we're getting dramatic. "Look, kid, I've met real heroes. I've worked with guys who've been overseas, who've seen combat, who've earned the right to talk about sacrifice. And trust me, they don't usually send their kids to announce it in shoe stores." The cruelty was subtle but devastating. By suggesting that real military service came with humility, while false claims came with boasting, he was painting Amaya's simple statement about her mother as evidence of deception. An uncomfortable murmur ran through the small crowd. The woman with the shopping cart finally spoke up, her voice hesitant but clear. "Maybe you should leave the girl alone. She's not bothering anyone." Reeves turned toward her with the practiced patience of someone used to managing difficult situations. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern, but I'm actually trying to help here. It's not kind to let a child continue believing something that isn't true. Better she learns now than keeps embarrassing herself." The implication was clear. Any adult who truly cared about Amaya would agree with him. It was a masterful manipulation that put the woman in an impossible position, either agree with his assessment or be painted as someone who encouraged children to lie. The woman's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Amaya with sympathy, but said nothing more. Amaya felt the weight of that silence like a physical force. Even people who seemed to want to help her were being silenced by this man's confidence, his authority, his ability to make his version of reality sound more reasonable than hers. "My mom will be here soon," she said, the words coming out smaller than she intended. "You'll see." Reeves glanced at his watch with theatrical precision. "And when she gets here, what exactly do you think is going to happen?" "She's going to prove me wrong. Show me her Special Forces membership card." The mockery in his tone was becoming more open now, less disguised as helpful skepticism. Some of the onlookers were beginning to look genuinely uncomfortable with his behavior, but still, no one intervened. Kalen grabbed Amaya's hand. "Come on, let's wait outside. We don't have to listen to this." But Amaya couldn't move. Something about walking away felt like surrender, like agreeing that this man's version of truth was stronger than hers. She thought about her mother's stories, carefully shared during quiet moments, about the places she'd been and the things she'd seen, about the weight of responsibility that sometimes made her mother's shoulders sag when she thought no one was looking. Those weren't fairy tales. They were real, lived experiences that had shaped both their lives. "No," Amaya said firmly. "I'm not leaving. I told the truth, and I'm not going to run away because he doesn't believe me." The defiance in her voice seemed to surprise Reeves. For a moment, his smirk faltered, replaced by something that might have been respect, but it was quickly buried under his need to maintain control of the situation. "Brave kid," he said, but the compliment felt like an insult. "Tell you what, if your mom walks through that door in actual Special Forces gear, not just any uniform, but real-deal Special Ops equipment, I'll personally apologize and buy you any pair of shoes in this store." The offer was designed to sound generous while being impossible to fulfill. Special Forces soldiers didn't walk around shopping malls in full tactical gear. It was a bet that Reeves was certain he couldn't lose. But what he didn't know was that Sergeant Major Nicole Richardson was, at that very moment, walking through the main entrance of South Park Mall, still wearing the dress uniform she'd worn to an awards ceremony at Fort Bragg that afternoon. And she was about to turn a routine shopping trip into something that would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives. The silence in the store felt different now, thicker, more expectant. Word had somehow spread through the retail space that something significant was happening in the shoe section. Employees had begun to gather at the edges of the scene, pretending to organize merchandise while keeping one ear on the conversation. Amaya stood with her back straight, fighting against every instinct that told her to make herself smaller. Her mother had always taught her that truth didn't require volume to be powerful, but standing there under the scrutiny of strangers, she wondered if her mother had ever faced a moment like this, where truth felt like a fragile thing that could be laughed away by someone with enough confidence. Officer Reeves had settled into his role as the reasonable adult in the room. His posture was relaxed, his voice measured, his expression one of patient tolerance. To anyone walking by, he might have looked like a helpful stranger offering guidance to a confused child. "Listen," he said, his tone softer now, as if he were sharing wisdom rather than delivering humiliation. "I get it. Military families have a lot of pride. Your mom probably does important work, but Special Forces." He shook his head slowly. "That's something different entirely. Those guys go through years of training that would break most people. They're selected from the top 1% of the top 1%. It's not a job you just qualify for because you're tough or dedicated." He looked around the circle of watchers, building his case. "I've worked with special operations personnel in joint task forces. I've seen what they can do, how they operate, and I can tell you, with absolute certainty, that elite military units don't look like." He gestured vaguely toward Amaya, leaving the sentence unfinished but his meaning crystal clear. The implicit message was devastating. People like her mother, black women, simply didn't belong in that world. And by extension, Amaya was either deluded or lying about something that should be obvious to everyone. A teenage boy who had been recording parts of the interaction whispered to his friend, "This is getting intense. Should we say something?" His friend shook his head. "What are we going to say? We don't know if she's telling the truth either." That uncertainty was exactly what Reeves was counting on. By framing the situation as a question of credibility rather than prejudice, He made it easy for bystanders to remain neutral. After all, they didn't know Amaya or her mother. Why should they take sides in what seemed like a simple disagreement about facts? But Amaya could see something in the officer's eyes that went beyond simple skepticism. There was satisfaction there, pleasure in the act of deflating her claims. This wasn't about protecting her from embarrassment or teaching her about honesty. This was about power, about someone with authority using that authority to diminish someone without it. "You think you know everything," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "But you don't know my mom. You don't know what she's done or where she's been or what she's sacrificed for this country." The word sacrificed seemed to trigger something in Reeves. His expression hardened slightly, a friendly facade slipping. "Sacrificed? Let me tell you about sacrifice, kid. Sacrifice is getting shot at by drug dealers on a Tuesday night. Sacrifice is missing your own kid's birthday party because you're working a homicide. Sacrifice is real. It's not something you play pretend about." The comparison was designed to minimize not just Amaya's claims, but her mother's entire service record. By positioning his law enforcement experience as more real, more valid than her mother's military service, he was attempting to establish a hierarchy where his authority superseded her truth. Kaylin's face flushed with anger. "That's not fair. Just because you're a cop doesn't mean you're the only one who helps people." Reeves's attention shifted to her with laser focus. "And just because someone claims to be something doesn't make it true. I could claim to be a Navy SEAL. Doesn't mean you should believe me without proof." "But she's not claiming to be anything," Kaylin protested. "She's talking about her mom, who conveniently isn't here to verify the story," Reeves pointed out. "How convenient is that?" The logic seemed sound to some of the onlookers. Nods of agreement rippled through parts of the crowd. Without evidence, without proof, why should they believe a child's claims over an adult's expertise? But what they didn't know, what Reeves didn't know, was that proof was already walking through them all, her dress uniform crisp and pristine, her bearing unmistakably military, heading directly toward them. Nicole Richardson had always been able to read a room within seconds of entering it. 22 years of military service, including 8 years in special operations, had honed her situational awareness to a razor's edge. She could assess threats, identify power dynamics, and determine the emotional temperature of any environment almost instantaneously. So when she walked into Dick's Sporting Goods and saw the cluster of people gathered in the shoe section, she immediately knew something was wrong. The body language was all off, too tense for casual shopping, too focused for random browsing. And at the center of it all was her daughter, standing rigid, with barely controlled emotion. Nicole's training kicked in automatically. She didn't rush toward the scene, didn't call out or draw attention to herself. Instead, she moved with purposeful calm, her dress uniform, complete with ribbons, patches, and insignia, drawing curious glances from shoppers as she crossed the store. The uniform she wore told a story that most civilians couldn't fully read, but would recognize as significant. The combat infantryman badge, the Bronze Star Medal, the patches indicating multiple deployments and specialized training. To anyone with military knowledge, her uniform was a roadmap of service and sacrifice. To others, it simply conveyed authority and competence. As she drew closer, Nicole could hear her daughter's voice, strained but defiant. "You don't know anything about her." And then a man's voice, confident and dismissive. "Sure, kid. Whatever you say." Nicole's jaw tightened. She could piece together what was happening without hearing the full conversation. Someone was challenging her daughter, making her defend something she shouldn't have to defend, making her prove her own truth to strangers. She reached the edge of the crowd just as Reeves was settling back against the display rack, his body language suggesting the matter was closed. Some of the onlookers were already beginning to disperse, the entertainment value fading as the confrontation seemed to wind down. But then Amaya spotted her. "Mom." The word burst out of her with such relief and vindication that even the most disinterested shoppers turned to look. Nicole stepped forward, her presence immediately shifting the entire dynamic of the scene. She didn't need to announce herself or explain who she was. Her uniform did that for her. But more than that, her bearing, her calm confidence, her obvious competence made it clear that this was not someone to be dismissed lightly. Reeves's expression went through several rapid changes. First confusion, then recognition of the uniform's significance, then a growing realization that his assumptions might have been wrong. But his pride, his need to maintain face in front of the crowd he'd been performing for, prevented him from immediately backing down. "Ma'am," he said, straightening up but keeping his tone casual. "Just having a conversation with your daughter here, trying to help her understand the difference between reality and imagination." Nicole's eyes moved from Reeves to her daughter, taking in Amaya's flushed face, her defensive posture, the tears she was fighting to contain. Then she looked at the circle of onlookers, noting their expressions of discomfort and curiosity. "What kind of help?" Nicole asked, her voice calm but carrying an edge that made several people in the crowd shift nervously. Reeves seemed to sense the danger, but he was too committed to his narrative to back down gracefully. "Well, she was telling her friend that you're in Special Forces. I just thought it was important to clarify that." "That what?" Nicole interrupted gently. The question hung in the air. Reeves had been about to say that it was important to clarify that such claims were false, but looking at Nicole's uniform, at the unmistakable evidence of her military service, the words died in his throat. "I mean," he fumbled, "it's just unusual to hear about. Not many people in that field, especially—" He gestured vaguely, unable to finish the sentence. "Especially what?" Nicole's voice remained calm, but the question carried weight. The crowd held its breath. Everyone understood that they were witnessing more than just a misunderstanding being cleared up. This was a moment where prejudices were being exposed, where assumptions were being challenged, where someone was about to be held accountable for their words. Reeves's confidence was crumbling by degrees, but he made one last attempt to maintain control of the narrative. "Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. I'm Officer Colton Reeves, Charlotte Mecklenburg PD. I've got 20 years in law enforcement. I work with military personnel regularly. I just thought—" "You thought what?" Nicole asked. "That my daughter was lying, that she was making up stories, that someone like me couldn't possibly serve in special operations." Each question was delivered with surgical precision, cutting through his attempts at deflection and forcing him to confront the actual substance of his behavior. The store had gone completely silent now. Even the background music seemed muted, as if the building itself was listening. What followed was not a dramatic confrontation or a moment of explosive anger. Instead, it was something more powerful, a steady, methodical dismantling of prejudice through the simple presentation of truth. Nicole reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out her military identification card. She didn't hand it to Reeves. She simply held it where the crowd could see the photo, the rank, the designations that told the story of her career. "Sergeant Major Nicole Richardson," she said clearly. "Special Forces. 22 years of service. 3 combat deployments. Currently assigned to the 1st Special Forces Group at Fort Bragg." The identification settled over the crowd, like a weight. Phones came out more openly now, people no longer pretending to be casual observers. This was the kind of moment that would be shared, discussed, remembered. Reeves stared at the ID card, his face cycling through several expressions. Confusion gave way to recognition, which gave way to a dawning horror as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. He began, then stopped. What could he say? That he was sorry? That he hadn't meant to mock a decorated veteran? That his assumptions had been reasonable given the circumstances? Nicole tucked the ID back into her pocket, then looked directly at him. "Officer Reeves, you told my daughter that people like me don't serve in special forces. You told her she was living in a fantasy. You told a room full of strangers that her truth was a lie. I'd like you to explain what you meant by people like me." The question was delivered without malice, but with the kind of relentless precision that made evasion impossible. Everyone in the store understood that they were witnessing something significant, not just a personal confrontation, but a larger conversation about assumptions, prejudice, and the courage required to challenge both. Reeves's mouth opened and closed several times. I wasn't trying to. He looked around desperately, but found no sympathetic faces, no one willing to help him out of the hole he'd dug for himself. "Take your time," Nicole said gently. "I'm interested in your explanation." The gentleness was somehow more devastating than anger would have been. It suggested confidence, patience, the certainty of someone who knew that truth was on her side and was willing to wait for it to emerge. Amaya watched her mother with awe. This was a side of Nicole she'd seen hints of before, during parent-teacher conferences, when a teacher underestimated her, during interactions with officials who tried to dismiss her concerns. But she'd never seen it deployed with such focused intensity. "Maybe," Reeves finally managed, "maybe I made some assumptions. Maybe I was wrong about some things." Nicole nodded slowly. Maybe. What kind of assumptions? The specificity of the question forced him to confront what he'd actually been thinking, what had actually driven his behavior. The crowd waited, sensing that this was the crucial moment where truth would either emerge or be buried under convenient vagueness. Reeves looked down at his shoes, then back up at Nicole. I guess I assumed that Special Forces was mostly, that it didn't include black women? Nicole asked, her voice still calm. The words hung in the air like smoke. Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one looked away. This was the moment they'd all been building toward, the explicit acknowledgement of what had really been driving the confrontation. Reeves's face went pale. I didn't say that. You didn't have to, Nicole replied. Your laughter said it for you. Your dismissal said it for you. Your absolute certainty that my daughter must be lying said it for you. She turned slightly, addressing not just Reeves, but the entire crowd. This is what prejudice looks like in 2025. It doesn't announce itself with slurs or obvious hatred. It hides behind concern for accuracy. It disguises itself as helpful skepticism. It positions itself as reasonable doubt. A woman near the back of the crowd whispered, "She's right. That's exactly what happened." Nicole looked back at Reeves. Officer Reeves, you have 20 years of law enforcement experience. That's commendable. I'm sure you've served your community with dedication. But today, you used that experience and that authority to humiliate a child whose only crime was being proud of her mother. The words were delivered without anger, but they carried the weight of absolute moral clarity. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing more than just a correction of misinformation. They were seeing someone held accountable for the real-world impact of their biases. What happened next surprised everyone, including Nicole. Instead of trying to defend himself further or making excuses, Officer Reeves took a deep breath and did something that required genuine courage. He faced the truth of what he'd done. "You're right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was wrong. Not just about the facts, but about everything. The way I treated your daughter, the assumptions I made, the way I acted." He looked directly at Amaya. "I owe you a real apology. Not because your mom is here to make me, but because you deserved better from the start." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as everyone else. For a moment, the defensive police officer disappeared, replaced by a man confronting his own failures. "Amaya," he continued, "you told the truth about your mother, and I turned it into a joke. I made you feel small because I couldn't imagine someone like your mom doing something I thought was reserved for people who looked different than her. That was wrong. That was my prejudice, not your lie." The apology was raw, unpolished, but genuine in a way that his earlier attempts had not been. It carried the weight of someone genuinely grappling with their own biases, rather than simply trying to escape an uncomfortable situation. Nicole studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Apology accepted. But the more important question is what you do with this moment going forward. "I don't understand," Reeves said. "This didn't happen in a vacuum," Nicole explained. "My daughter isn't the first person you've made assumptions about. She won't be the last person you encounter who doesn't fit your expectations. The question is whether you use this experience to examine those expectations, or whether you file it away as an isolated incident." The challenge was respectful but direct. Nicole wasn't just seeking an apology for her daughter. She was pushing for the kind of deeper reflection that might prevent similar incidents in the future. Reeves was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with the implications of what she was saying. Finally, he nodded. "You're right. This isn't the first time I've jumped to conclusions. Maybe it's time I thought more carefully about why that keeps happening." An older woman in the crowd called out, "That's what growth looks like." The comment drew a few murmurs of agreement, and for the first time since the confrontation began, the atmosphere in the store felt constructive rather than destructive. Nicole turned to address the broader crowd. "This conversation isn't really about military service or special forces. It's about something much simpler, the respect